Welcome to this SimpleIndex instructional video. In this video, we're starting with the basics. How do we interact with SimpleIndex to create a new job or a new configuration? You'll hear those terms used interchangeably. The extension on a SimpleIndex file is .sic, SimpleIndex configuration, but you'll see here in the software we use the term job. They're the same thing. Job happens to fit more nicely on the button. Right now I have a job already loaded into the software. You can see that that's identified by there being a name of a job here at the very top bar, and also the fact that some index fields are showing over here on the right. And that was done by hitting the Open Job button and selecting the job, or you can see your most recent ones are here, so you can simply double click one of those. But in the purposes of this video, we're going to be creating a new one. But just to show you what that leads to, let's take a look at what's going on in this job at a very top level. We're not going to look at all the functionality, but if I go to this little icon right here, or if I go File, Job Settings Wizard, you can see these are all the different steps in the wizard for creating the type of functionality that we want within a given job. But really there's only a handful of those that are required for the most basic job, and that's what we're talking about here. So let's cancel out of this one. And I'm going to create a new job. So the wizard loads, and you can see that we don't have all of those steps showing because we haven't filled them in yet. So at the beginning we have this wizard mode, we have our new job, which is what we're doing. You can also edit a job here, so if you had an existing one you just wanted to make some modifications to, choose that radio button, then open the file. There's also integrated mode, and integrated mode is when you have, usually in a more enterprise situation, where the IT department is distributing the job out to multiple computers. So this is kind of how that's done. So we're going to stick with new job here, and we can also then tell it what the source of our files is. So in this case, we could be working from a scanner. We could have files that are already digital, so we're working from a folder. We could work out of an email box, or we can combine any of these up here that we just talked about. So in this case, we're going to work from a folder. I'll choose that radio button, and immediately it takes me to the Save As dialog. So we're going to go ahead and name this job, so that as we do functions later, maybe we want to save it as we're going along or what have you, that information's already there and we're not just saving it at the end. So I'm just going to call this job Demo, and there we go. We can move to the next step. So the next step is, since I told it I'm working from a folder, what is that folder? That's our file input. So you can see there's something already filled in there. It says %config file folder %\input. Now what that's saying is where I just saved that configuration name, that job name, that thing that I called demo, it's saying go to that location, %config file folder, that's my config file, go to that folder, and then you'll see a subfolder called input. And that's how we're going to do it. So we're just going to leave this as it is. If I needed to browse to something that already existed, I could hit set and then just browse down to any given folder that I want to. So if I were going to the same location, it would have been F, and that's going to expand, and then we can go down, and that was in the images subfolder. And then right here, I could tell it that was the folder I'm going to. We're just going to accept what's already there. And then it's asking, so do we want to keep the input files? That means as we're processing these files, do we want to leave them in that original input location? And for now, we're going to turn that on. That's useful when you're testing out a job so you don't have to keep dropping files back into it. But normally in your production, you would uncheck that box, and that way you don't have the same files staying in your input folder and getting processed over and over again. You can also see there's an option for splitting multi-page files. So if we have a file that is multiple pages and each of those pages needs to have something done to it individually, we want to split that up. So we want to break a PDF, say, that's 10 pages into 10 individual files. However, if we're just needing to work on the first page, the index information we need is there, or we don't need to look for anything on the later pages, then you can uncheck that option and it'll just work on the file as an entire document rather than 10 separate pages, for example. Process subfolders. So if we have any subfolders in there and we need to go down and drill down into those folders as well, that's what process subfolders does, just like it sounds. And then if we are doing subfolders, we can remove empty folders. So as we work through those subfolders, we clear out their contents, which again means we would not have our input files kept. We would uncheck that option. We could then delete those empty folders and they won't be there at the end of the process. But we're going to keep things simple in this. This is just a kind of a top-down look at how SimpleIndex performs the processing of documents, the very basics of what you need. You can see there is some advanced options here. We're not going to get into that within the context of this video right now. So let's just move on. Image enhancement. If you're bringing in files that don't look as optimal as they can, whether that be from a scanner or in this case just even opening up some files that are in a folder, we can apply some corrections to that. But again, we're just doing what's the bare minimum of what I can do to get a job going right now. So we're going to skip past this one. We're going to skip past our PDF processing, but sometimes there are problems with PDF files as they are sent to you from third parties, and you need to do a little work on those as well. So we have lots of options for that. File output. We need this one. Where are we going to store our new files? So we're working on some files. Perhaps we're just going to rename them. Where do I want to put them when I'm done with them? Same situation. We can go to this config file folder /output. And I'm going to accept the default here. So it's going to go back to that same F:\images, and then there'll be a folder in there called output at the end of what we're working on here. And you can see it kind of gives us a little sample of the output. So we've got exactly what I was going through, F:\images output, and then right now it's calling it input file.pdf, but we'll have some control over that on a later tab. And then you can see there are some options here for fast export, setting some file properties, things like that. Stuff to be covered in a later video. Database. SimpleIndex can work with databases, whether that's writing the data that you've given it as indexes out to the database so you can access it later, or looking up things in a database and applying them as indexes while the job is running. Both things are possible. And you can see we have some modes here, inserting records, updating records that are already in there. And we can also do some searching with SimpleIndex once things are already in there. And you can even find existing records and add files to them, match and attach. Again, all stuff for later videos, but wanted to make you aware. So here's where we're talking about the indexing. Those fields we saw over here on the right earlier, this is where we're able to tell it what our fields are going to be. So we're going to add one. And we're just going to add one for the purposes of this video. So let's do add. And you can see you have a lot of different types. Autofills, auto numbers. I'm not going to read the list to you, but right now we're just going to do a text, which means that the operator is going to key something in. And that's going to take us to naming the index field. So we're just going to say, so what I'm going to give it is a file name. And then you can see right here, what do I want to do with that piece of information? Is it required? Do I want to make sure that the user puts in something there? Sure, we'll make it required. Do I want to use it as a file name? Well, I'm calling it file name. Yeah, let's use it as a file name. Do I want to make it a folder level? So when I'm saving out these PDFs at the end in that output folder we just talked about, I can put a subfolder in that uses this field. And then also, do I want to forward it? So if I'm working with multiple files in this original input folder, do I want to take the value that I type in to my index field and pass it along to later files in that same batch? And we'll set that for right now, but if you're not locked into that, you can change it. We'll see that in a moment. Now, if we're doing any zones, this is where you would put those zones in. So if we were using OCR as one of those field types, we could tell it where to look on the page for that OCR. And we also have options about which pages to process and some way we can deal with different OCR aspects, but we're not doing that in this one. We'll move on. If we wanted to add any templates, if we want to make sure that the user is entering something in a specific format, or if we're again using OCR, we want to make sure we're matching a certain structure to those OCR characters. That's all done here on the template control window. But again, just sticking to the basics here. So we'll finish out of that. You can see now we have an index field. The type of it is text. I'm calling the field file name. I don't have a template. It is required. I am going to make it the file name, and I am going to forward it. And you can check those things right here as well. So we could uncheck the required, for example. You don't have to go back into that sub wizard and make changes there. We're just going to leave it at the one field right now. So let's go next. Next is OCR. If we were doing any sort of OCR, this is where we would control that. We can do full page. We can skip over the OCR if it already exists, but here we're not going to do any OCR. Our next is the index and batch logs. There are two kinds of logs that you can have within SimpleIndex. You can have an index log, and so that's all the information that was captured about the document as we're going through. So anything that gets filled in the index fields is stored in that index log. The batch log is more about the process that SimpleIndex actually did as it was going on. So when did the job launch? How long did it take to run? The operator name associated with it, we want to store things like that. So you can see you have the index log and the batch log. We're not going to turn on any logging in that. And so in this fact, I'm just going to delete that out of there so it doesn't even make that log subfolder for me. Imprinting, it can stamp text onto the digital image. This is where you would control that. Then we have advanced settings. And you can see each of these as a submenu. We're not going to get into them right now, but things to do with auto numbering, jobs that can run before and after this particular job runs, or other processes that can be kicked off from there, like batch files, for example. Advanced versions of both our indexes and our logging and our database. And then also some user login options. So if we want to make a user sign into this piece of software each time they, or this particular job each time they launch it, we can do that so we can kind of keep track of who is running the job. And then last, we just complete and save settings. So you can see what I created earlier, f:/images, demo.sic. I'm going to finish. It'll say, do I want to save that? Yes, I do. And so now our word demo has appeared up here because we have a job loaded. And then our single index field has appeared. All right, so we've created our first job. Let's actually run it and see what happens. First of all, we need to go to that location where we told it those input folder was going to exist. And let's make that folder. So just a new folder here. And remember, it was going to look for a folder called input, so we'll name it that. And then I'm just going to drop a file in here. This is a little 2-page file. And we're just going to, remember we have our split multi-page files turned on, so it is going to break this into 2 separate documents for me. So I can go back here, run the job. It's going to bring in everything that it finds in that folder. So if there were 100 PDFs in there, it would bring those in. In this case, we just have the one. And you can see that it's showing now 2 files available. And so we just need to give it a file name. That's all we're doing. This is a very basic job. We're just taking these individual pages and giving them different names. So we're just going to say page 1 for this one. And at this point, I can click Save Index, telling it I want to accept what I've just put there. Or you can click the Enter key if you just want to stay on the keyboard. So Save Index. And you notice that that page 1 that I entered has now reappeared, even though I've moved on to page 2. That was that forward option we saw earlier. So if I had multiple pages that were going to receive this page 1 as their file name, I could just leave that there, hit Save Index, and move on through the file. In this case, I'm going to change it to page 2. I'm going to click Save Index once more. And it says, okay, we've indexed everything that's in that batch. Do we want to release it? Yes, we do. So it's going to go through the little export step real quick. And then we can go under the View option here and actually go straight to our output folder. We don't have to go back and browse through Windows Explorer. We've got nice handy shortcuts here. So go to the output folder. This pops up. You can see it's f:/images, exactly where we put those other folders. And we have page 1 and page 2. We've now taken that 2-page original PDF, split it into 2 separate pages, given them a unique file name, and they're here in the output location. If I go back up to images, you can see there's our input. The file is still in there because we had keep input files turned on. And then we were able to turn it into 2 separate distinct files. And then also we have our configuration right here, demo.sic. So really that is the basics. You really just have to have an input, whether it be paper that you're scanning, something coming out of a folder, or something coming out of an email box. You have to define at least an index, tell it how we're working with these documents. What do we need to find on these documents? In this case, we're just entering a value, but remember we can find things via OCR, via barcodes, that sort of thing. We can match patterns in that text that we're seeing on the page or that barcode. Lots of possibilities, but here we're just keeping it very simple just to create the most basic job we can. So we had to tell it where it's coming from, where it's going out to in the output location, what's my index or indexes. In this case, we just did the 1. And then store that job, give it a name and save it out, and it's ready to run. Thanks for watching. I hope this has been helpful. We're going to be doing a lot more basic videos like this, and we'll see what all those other features that we were talking about in the wizard are. We'll see you in the next one.